Something about the 4 o'clock hour. There is more breaking news from the Wall Street Journal. They are reporting that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was on the July 25th phone call with the president of Ukraine and Donald Trump. That is the call that's at the center of the impeachment inquiry against President Trump, at the center of the whistleblower complaint that put that in motion. From the New Wall Street Journal reporting, quote, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was among administration officials who listened in on the July 25th phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky, a senior State Department official said Monday. It's a disclosure that ties the State Department more closely to the House impeachment inquiry. Mr. Pompeo's participation on the call hasn't been previously reported. Last week, a State Department official disputed the contention in a complaint filed under federal whistleblower laws by a Central Intelligence Agency officer that another top State Department official, Counselor Yerlik Breckbull, listened in on the call. Joining our conversation, Juanita Tolliver, campaign director at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Juanita, it would seem that Friday's subpoenas for Mike Pompeo may have shaken loose some disclosures, some maybe recognition from the sitting Secretary of State. I mean, as Hallman said in the last block, let's just hit pause and let all this sink in. If we don't get beyond these two breaking developments today, that's okay with me. The sitting Secretary of State subpoenaed Friday for documents. The president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, subpoenaed just 30 minutes ago for documents. And in the last few minutes, the Wall Street Journal reporting that the phone call at the center of the whistleblower complaint, the phone call at the center of Donald Trump's impeachment inquiry, was one that Mike Pompeo listened in on.
Everyone was in on this. And if Pompeo was on that call and heard President Trump make that overture to Zelensky, I'm now asking the question of, did he order the memo to be misclassified in the secure system? Did he take the next steps to try to cover this up? How far down does this go? Because we heard Giuliani in his ramblings over the weekend say, I only acted at the order of State Department. Trump, we know, offered up Giuliani's services, but now State Department is deep in this. So I'm thinking, who's going to come up next? Whose name are we going to see next? And we've seen through the indicators of who House Intel is subpoenaing and how they've lined up their depositions that they're expecting to uncover even more information.
So, John Hallman, this news breaking, you flagged it for me, this Wall Street Journal report that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was among the administration officials who listened in on the July 25th phone call between President Trump and the Ukrainian president. Let me just read from the whistleblower complaint about how that call played in. This is from the whistleblower. In the course of my official duties, I've received information from multiple U.S. government officials that the President of the United States is using the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 election. This interference includes, among other things, pressuring a foreign country to investigate one of the president's main domestic political rivals. The president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is a central figure in this effort. AG Barr appears in this effort as well. So we know from the notes of the call that the White House released that Donald Trump said, I need a favor, though, and then went on and did. So the White House has corroborated the part of the whistleblower complaint that says that Trump was soliciting foreign interference. Right. We now know that the sitting Secretary of State heard the president solicit election interference.
Secretary of State, Department of Justice, these are like big agencies, like the important ones, right? The ones that we, along with the Treasury, are the ones that, the pantheon where titans, have sat over the history of America. We are now talking about a scandal that's enveloping the president and two of his top cabinet secretaries, the Attorney General and now the Secretary of State, in the middle of this thing. I think it's just, again, it's worth pausing as we head into impeachment land and this story and the way it's going to subsume everything else over the course of the next 3 months. When Watergate happened, just as a story, we think back on it now, part of the epic quality of it was that there were this rogues gallery that emerged. Now, Trump has had a lot of rogues around him for a long time, but which of the rogues would become central to the thing that might be his downfall? We now see Rudy Giuliani, Mike Pompeo now in the middle of this thing, along with Barr, these are the people who now it looks like as we start to tell this story where the focus is going to be. These people are all going to be called up to testify publicly, privately. They're all going to be subpoenaed. They're all going to be put under oath. They're all going to be asked a lot of questions, and we're going to start to think of them as, Vice President Agnew in Nixon's case, but also the Gordon Liddy's and the Chuck Colsons and the Howard Hunts that now kind of are redolent of everything that was so tragic and so despicable about Watergate. These are now, we're starting to get a sense of who the dramatis persona are that we're going to be focusing on these weeks ahead. And I think, it goes back to what Rick said earlier, which is this notion. And this Pompeo is among many who have been pointed to at various times as the adult supervision at the White House. And then you find out, well, no, he was actually on the call, which, doesn't just speak to perfidy and bad behavior, but also speaks to the notion that this idea that there are any adults in the room around this president that have any real effect on him. I'm not even sure they're trying in a lot of cases. I'm not sure Mike Pompeo is anything other than a cheerleader, and it has been for Trump all along. But the notion that there are adults in the room is, I think, going to be one of the many fictions that's going to be rendered bankrupt by the time this is over.
And let me I'm thinking of Nancy Pelosi's comments on 60 Minutes and in her interview with Joe and Mika, where she said this is a sad moment from the country. If the Wall Street Journal is reporting that this is a source close to Pompeo disclosing that Mike Pompeo listened in while Donald Trump asked the president of Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, we now not only have a president, and I think some things about Trump we have become used to hearing. We're used to hearing Trump mobbed up. We're used to hearing Trump on his cell phone with Rudy Giuliani asking to cover up the porn star or slip some, money to Michael Cohen or, go float this on Hannity and sanitize it with the base. We are not used to hearing an American Secretary of State sitting in and listening in on a call where a foreign leader is asked to dirty up a political opponent.
Is extorted to dirty up a political opponent.
What did he do? What did he do the day after? What did he do the next day? What has Mike Pompeo done?
Take contemporaneous notes. The other thing, in addition to just the personalities who are going to get knocked down in these dominoes falling, is all of them are going to be sources of evidence.
Yep.
And that's why you had people close to Pompeo giving him up, is people are all trying to protect themselves now. And the great lesson from this is that you don't get on the Trump train and stay clean. If you came into the White House because you wanted to get...
I'm looking at Rick. Somebody tried to book about that.
That's right. But
what happens to you?
Everything you touch is.
Everything Trump touches dies. But Tim's exactly right. And one of the things to be kept in mind here, these are not staff. They are not grown-ups. They are not adults in the room. They are not guardrails. They are co-conspirators at this point.
Yes.
Okay. That is what Mike Pompeo now is a co-conspirator. Unless he breaks now, tells the truth, and comes out on this thing, he's in the same pool.
But to answer your question directly, you asked the question, what did he do the next day? He kept coming into work every day and propping up Donald Trump. Correct. That's what he's done. Every day since this day, since this phone call occurred until today, Mike Pompeo has been going back to work, in full knowledge of this phone call, having participated in this phone call. He's been showing up to work every day, doing the work of Donald Trump.
Let's back up just one fact pattern for our viewers, because after we went off the air Friday, the news broke that Kurt Volker had resigned. If you don't know who Kurt Volker is, he was an American diplomat who was working on U.S.-Ukrainian issues. He resigned. We don't know exactly why, but what is the difference between what Volker did and knew and what Pompeo did and knew?
Nothing. They're both participants in possible extortion or possible bribery. They're going to be asked about that. Any records they have from email to telephone calls to their own notes.
There's the headline, U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine resigns. Why does one resign either because of exposure or shame or feeling, and the other think he can go run for Senate?
Well, Volker's name came up in the whistleblower's complaint. So there's a very direct, central kind of...
Who did Volker work for?
Volker worked for Trump. Volker worked for the federal government. So did Pompeo.
But
I'm just saying,
exactly right.
At the time, there wasn't the same kind of information. They're going to have to revisit this now, given what we know about Pompeo and the actions he didn't take, which was he should have raised an alarm the second he heard Trump talking to Zelensky about trying to kneecap Joe Biden.
Joyce, I know just enough about the law to be super dangerous, but I'm also from California where wildfires, the wind shifts a little bit and they take out entire towns. This feels like a political wildfire to me, and the wind seemed to have just shifted right over Mike Pompeo's head.
I think that they really have. And one explanation for Volker resigning could be that he is signaling his availability as a witness. Because once you're no longer an administration employee, it's very difficult for the president to keep you from testifying. He can try to exert executive privilege, but we all listened to Jim Comey on nationwide television. I suspect that we'll be listening to the former special envoy to Ukraine in the future, and that the distinction between he and Pompeo, at least now, is that his lawyers will be taking him to Congress in an effort to cooperate. You know, Congress has used a very smart strategy here with both Pompeo and with Giuliani. These initial subpoenas are just for documents. And the reason that that's significant is because you can't avoid, as the person who's being subpoenaed, you can't avoid turning over those documents, claiming a Fifth Amendment privilege to avoid incriminating yourself. You have to turn over the documents. That law is well established. And prosecutors will use this sort of a strategy, first obtaining the documents, then looking them over before deciding who and how to testify, or rather to subpoena for testimony. So I think you're right. The direction of the fire has changed. It is dead set over Pompeo's head. He has a lot to explain. The big question is whether he'll try to save himself now.
Well, let me just reset this breaking news from the Wall Street Journal, which has done a lot of incredible reporting on this story. Wall Street Journal reporting just a few moments ago that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was among the administration officials who listened in on the July 25th phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. That's according to a senior State Department official. It's a disclosure that ties the State Department more closely to the House impeachment inquiry, writes the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Pompeo's participation on the call hasn't been previously reported. Last week, a State Department official disputed the contention in a complaint filed under federal whistleblower laws by a CIA officer that another top State Department official listened in on the call. So it wasn't the person who was fingered initially. It was America's Secretary of State, Juanita.
Supposed to handle diplomatic relations, supposed to respond accordingly, supposed to keep the president in line to not make statements like this. But what we have seen is that he, similar to Barr, similar to most people in this administration, dedicate their full-time service not to the U.S. citizens, but to protecting Trump at all costs.
You know,
Let me just read a little bit more about what happened on this phone call that Pompeo sat and listened on. We don't have any reporting. Maybe the same disclosure that revealed his participation will tell us what he did after he heard the president say this. Donald Trump initiated or asked the Ukrainians to initiate or continue an investigation into the activities of former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden. On the call, Mike Pompeo listened in on and didn't say or do anything about, as far as we understand. Donald Trump asked the Ukrainians to assist in purportedly uncovering that allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 election originated in Ukraine. Mike Pompeo, you guys, America's Secretary of State, sat there, I don't know, checking his texts while the American president asked a foreign leader to assist in purportedly uncovering the allegations of Russian interference in 2016 originated in Ukraine. So we've got Tom Bossert at the beginning of the show, the president's former Homeland Security advisor, pleading in an almost emotional way, John Hallman, to the president. It seems that talking through TV is the only way to do it, to stop it with the Ukrainian hoax. We now know our country's Secretary of State listened to Donald Trump repeat this Ukrainian conspiracy theory, and to our knowledge, do nothing.
Right. It's one of the things I think people have learned over time with Trump is that to challenge him with facts, to tell him to stop, to tell him that you have to get off this issue, this obsession, this conspiracy theory, it does not work, and B, it impedes your progress towards greater and greater power. And one thing that we know about Pompeo over the course of his time in the Trump administration is that he's been an artful and skillful and successful player of the inside game in Trump world. This is not a guy he was not one of the original coterie of Trump people. He was not a big, important person on the campaign, who kind of wound his way in from Congress into the CIA and then into this job, and has steadily risen. Most of the people who have gained traction in Trump's world have been cut down. Pompeo is one so far who has not put a foot wrong by Donald Trump's view. And I think we don't know exactly what was going through his mind. It'll be fascinating to find out. But one of the things that was surely going through his mind is, I'm not going to tell the guy to get off this crazy conspiracy theory, because you tell this guy to get off a crazy conspiracy theory, that's how you find yourself out of a job.
Might not tell him to not do it, but he will help cover it up at the end.
Oh, I think he could be much worse than that. But at a minimum, you know that Pompeo is not going to be a truth teller, because being a truth teller to Donald Trump is the way that you see your knees cut out.
And to your point, John Heilemann, the date of the call, I think it was within 10 days that Pompeo was rumored to become the first person since Henry Kissinger to be a candidate to be both America's
Secretary of State and NSA.
So maybe helping the president ask a foreign leader to dirty up Joe Biden, lie about Russian interference, and meet or speak with two people the president named explicitly as his personal envoys on these matters. Rudy
It's a very strong resume.
And Bill Barr.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.